In 1989, the government released 714 prairie dogs onto ground it had spent 40 years poisoning. 10 miles from downtown Denver, the Rocky Mountain Arsenal made mustard gas and nerve agent for the Army, then leased the same equipment to Shell Oil to make pesticide. A single 93-acre pit on the property held 200 million gallons of liquid waste. When the Army tried to bury the problem by pumping it 12,000 feet underground, Denver started having earthquakes. The prairie dogs were brought in to stabilize the dirt. Nothing more than that. They did exactly that. And then they kept going. 26 years later, that same ground was used to release the rarest mammal in North America, an animal declared extinct in the wild. I'm Ambrose Wild. What happened in between is a chain of cause and effect about 9 links long, and nobody planned a single one past the first. The site opened in 1942, weeks after Pearl Harbor. The Army wanted flat ground too far inland for any bomber, and it took 20,000 acres of shortgrass prairie northeast of Denver. Around 200 farming families got weeks to leave. Their crops went under the plow, a schoolhouse became an officers' club, and the place vanished behind chain link and armed patrols. For 3 decades, 2 poisonous industries ran on the same dirt. The Army made mustard gas, lewisite, napalm, and white phosphorus. After the war, Shell Oil leased the same buildings and pipework to manufacture pesticides. Neither had anywhere to put its waste, so the waste went into the ground. Unlined trenches, open evaporation ponds. Basin F held liquid so concentrated that waterfowl landing on it died within minutes. Underground was worse. Contamination crept toward wells supplying drinking water to 1.5 million people. So in 1961, the Army drilled a disposal well 12,000 feet into bedrock and pumped 165 million gallons of waste down it under pressure. The fluid lubricated faults locked for centuries. Denver, a city with no earthquake history whatsoever, started shaking. The biggest quake hit in 1967, over a year after the pumping stopped, because the pressure was still spreading through fractured rock. That well is now taught in geology courses. It proved people can trigger earthquakes by pushing fluid into rock, and it gets cited whenever a disposal well is regulated in Oklahoma or Texas today. But the fence had a side effect nobody intended. Those buffer zones existed to keep civilians clear of explosions and gas leaks, so thousands of acres of perimeter land went 40 years without a plow, a housing tract, or a spray rig. While every farm around Denver was paved or planted, the arsenal was quietly running the last undisturbed shortgrass prairie on the Front Range. Living in it were black-tailed prairie dog colonies nobody had counted, protected by the secrecy that made the place notorious. Cleaning the rest went badly. When crews dug the sludge out of Basin F and spread it to dry, wind carried the fumes into Commerce City, and residents started reporting headaches and breathing problems. The work stopped. The arithmetic was against them too. You cannot incinerate 17,000 acres, and you cannot truck it somewhere else, because there is no somewhere else that will take it. So the goal changed from removal to containment. Over 15 years, the Army and Shell spent $2.1 billion scraping the top 10 feet off the worst zones into 2 double-lined landfills on site. And 5 plants went in to filter groundwater around the clock. The plan already included bringing prairie dogs back, which left the engineers a problem most landfill designers never face. They needed a cap no burrowing animal could open. The spec they wrote is called a bio-intrusion barrier. 18 inches of crushed concrete compacted against the measured digging strength of the animal they expected. With the poison sealed, the surface was safe and completely dead. Bulldozers had taken the native seed bank, the fungal networks and the soil structure out, along with the contamination. What was left was hardpan. Rain hit it and ran off sideways. Nothing rooted there. Then, in 1986, biologists surveying the buffer zones found something nobody was looking for. Bald eagles, dozens of them, roosting together through the winter in the old cottonwoods. They were there for the quiet, the trees, and the prairie dogs they were eating. Eagles carry federal protection, so the discovery turned a demolition question into a political fight, and the conservation side won. Congress made the place a wildlife refuge, which handed the Fish and Wildlife Service 15,000 acres of dead dirt and no budget to seed it. They needed something that would restructure soil, move nutrients, reshape vegetation, and build habitat at once, for free, without supervision. In 1989, they started expanding the surviving colonies with a relocation of exactly 714 animals. 134 were trapped elsewhere on the arsenal. 534 were pulled off Denver construction sites by a volunteer rescue group. 46 came out of a radio tracking study. Each was ear-tagged, dusted for fleas, and dropped into a starter burrow. The assignment was to hold the soil down. The first thing that changed was underground. A prairie dog burrow is not a hole, it is a system. The shape does two jobs. Water that used to sheet off compacted ground ran into the tunnels instead and soaked in. And the tunnel ventilates itself because the colony builds two entrances at deliberately different heights. So wind crossing the taller mound drops the pressure there and pulls air through the whole burrow. That keeps it breathable. It also keeps it dry. Every load of spoil pushed up carried subsoil minerals into the light, where it mixed with droppings and dead plant matter. Microbes the bulldozers had crushed out of existence moved back into the loosened ground, and nutrient cycling restarted from nothing. An animal that could do that was the only thing standing between this place and the extinct predator nobody had named yet. Above ground, the colony went to work on the plants. Prairie dogs clip vegetation constantly, and not because they are hungry. They need to see a coyote coming, so anything tall gets cut. Their alarm system is worth a second here. Researchers at Northern Arizona University recorded those calls for decades and found the animals encode the size, shape, color, and speed of whatever is approaching. It is close to a working vocabulary, and it only functions if the grass stays short. That clipping suppresses tall grass and shrubs and selects for short, broadleaf plants that regrow fast. And regrowth on a grazed colony carries more nitrogen than the same plant left alone. So a prairie dog town does not just create a lawn, it manufactures better food than the prairie around it. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. I go deep on one of these every week, which is why the queue started forming. Burrowing owls arrived first, and they get no say in where they live, because they hunt like raptors and cannot dig. They take over abandoned tunnels, which stay temperature stable and hidden. Then they do something strange at the door. They collect dung, scatter it around the entrance, and eat the beetles it pulls in. Bait, laid by a bird in a hole made by a rodent on a former weapons plant. Mountain plovers came next. They nest on bare, scraped earth, which almost nowhere on the Front Range still offers. Chicks raised on active colonies came out bigger and survived better because the forage and the sightlines both favoured them. Ferruginous and red-tailed hawks took territories over the towns. And the bald eagles that started the refuge fight came back in larger numbers, hunting the colonies that drew them there in the first place. In 2007, the biggest arrival showed up. Wild bison, from a herd carrying no cattle genes, which makes them rare in their own right. This was not decoration. Bison seek out short, high-nitrogen forage, exactly what the colonies produce, and in return they graze down the tall growth at the edges that would otherwise close the sightlines. Two species that had not shared this ground since before the Civil War started maintaining each other's habitat again. Then the system nearly collapsed. Sylvatic plague comes from Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium behind the Black Death, and it reached North America around 1900 in ship rats. That timing is the whole problem. 120 years is nothing in evolutionary terms, so prairie dogs carry no inherited defense. An outbreak does not thin a colony, it erases one. Between 1989 and 2002, plague swept the arsenal 6 times, killing up to 95% of the animals in the zones it hit. And each time, the owls lost their burrows and the hawks lost their prey. Whatever was coming later could not live on a colony that kept dying. The response got sophisticated fast. Dusting burrows by hand with flea powder worked, at about 6 acres a day, on a refuge the size of a small city. So the US Geological Survey built a vaccine instead. It uses a harmless raccoon pox virus carrying 2 plague genes, which teaches the immune system to fight an infection the animal has never met. It goes out in peanut butter flavoured bait, dyed with a marker that shows up in the whiskers of anything that ate it, so biologists can confirm coverage without trapping anything. Crews spread it from 4-wheelers at 60 acres an hour. Drones would be faster, but Denver International Airport is next door, so 4-wheelers it is. On the 5th of October 2015, crates opened in the northeast corner of the refuge, and around 30 black-footed ferrets went into the burrows. In 1979, the species was declared extinct in the wild. 2 years later, a ranch dog in Wyoming carried a dead one home. 18 survivors went into captivity, and every black-footed ferret alive today descends from that group. Only about 7 contributed meaningfully to the gene pool, which is why the species is still fragile genetically, and why the first cloned endangered animal in the United States was a ferret, born in 2020 from cells frozen in 1988. In 2024, a cloned female had kits, putting genes back that had been missing for 36 years. Ferrets eat almost nothing but prairie dogs, roughly 100 to 150 a year each, and they live inside the burrows. Captive-born kits cannot hunt, so before release they spend weeks in outdoor pens learning on live prey. Getting them onto the arsenal was never symbolic. It was a measurement. Burrow density and prey numbers had to clear a hard threshold before anyone signed off, which makes the release itself the proof that a full food chain existed on ground that used to make nerve gas. By 2018, roughly 90 were breeding there in the wild. Look at the order it happened in. Rodents broke open dead soil. Broken soil took in water. Water grew plants. Grazing made those plants richer. Richer plants pulled in bison, which held the structure open. Empty burrows housed owls. Bare ground raised bigger plover chicks. Concentrated prey drew hawks and eagles. And the density of it eventually crossed the line where North America's rarest carnivore could live there. The numbers now are strange to read. Over 15,000 acres, the largest urban wildlife refuge in the country, ringed by suburbs. More than 330 recorded species. Over 340,000 visitors a year on ground that sat under armed guard for half a century. The EPA has taken nearly 16,000 acres off the list of the most contaminated sites in America and cleared them for unrestricted use. Another 917 acres went to Commerce City, which built a high school, a civic centre, a soccer stadium, and 400 acres of parkland on it. We spent $2.1 billion sealing the poison in, and every living thing standing on top of that seal was put there by an animal that weighs 2 pounds, works without instruction, and was hired to keep the dust down. I'm Ambrose Wild. There are more places that came back the same way, from the bottom up, by accident, and I'll be walking through every one of them here.